You are not lazy. Some of the most common habits in your daily life are actually symptoms of depression hiding in plain sight. We live in a culture that normalizes exhaustion, disconnection, and emotional flatness. And that normalization is exactly how chronic depression conceals itself, hiding in plain sight. Not all depression looks like lying in bed unable to move. In fact, the most dangerous form wears the face of perfectly ordinary behavior. Oversleeping, scrolling your phone for hours, losing interest in food, apologizing for everything. These are not personality quirks, they are recognized clinical symptoms, and there is one behavior in particular. Something millions of people wear as a badge of pride, something that gets celebrated and rewarded. That researchers have identified as one of the strongest early warning signs of chronic depression. I will name it before this video ends. And when I do, it may change how you see yourself entirely. In the next few minutes, we are going to walk through 10 habits that society has taught you are completely normal, when in reality, each one has a clinical name, a documented mechanism, and a profound impact on your mental health. This is not about diagnosing yourself. It is about finally seeing what has been hiding inside ordinary life. Here is something almost nobody tells you about sleep. Sleeping too much is listed in the DSM-5, the official diagnostic manual for mental disorders, as a formal symptom of a major depressive episode. It even has a clinical name, hypersomnia. And it is far more common than the insomnia we typically associate with depression. When the mind is in pain, the body retreats into sleep as an escape from what waking life demands. Researchers at the University of Michigan found that people who consistently sleep 9 or more hours per night are significantly more likely to report depressive symptoms than those who sleep 7 to 8 hours. This is not about the occasional lazy Sunday or recovery sleep after a demanding week. This is about the pull toward bed that feels almost gravitational, the exhaustion that more sleep never fixes. The mornings where waking up feels like a punishment for still being alive. Depression changes the architecture of sleep itself, particularly the regulation of REM cycles, which is why even after 10 hours, you can feel drained, foggy, and genuinely unwilling to face the day. Society tells you that sleeping a lot means you are tired or lazy. Science tells us it can mean your nervous system is trying to escape a pain it has never been able to name. Not lazy, actually hurting. And the next habit lives in everyone's pocket, and almost no one stops to question it. Now here is one that almost everyone does, and almost nobody questions. You pick up your phone, you are not looking for anything in particular. You scroll through images, videos, news, comments, for 45 minutes, an hour, sometimes more. And when you put the phone down, you feel somehow worse than before. Emptier, more restless, more disconnected from your own life. Researchers at the University of Pennsylvania published findings demonstrating that increased passive social media use, scrolling without genuine engagement, is directly linked to higher rates of depression and loneliness. What is actually happening in those moments is not entertainment. Avoidance. It is emotional avoidance. The brain, flooded with low-level distress it cannot process, reaches for external stimulation to interrupt the internal signal. It is the same fundamental mechanism that drives substance use, compulsive overeating, and overworking, except this particular escape route sits in everyone's pocket, available every waking moment. The technical term is digital numbing, and it is one of the most normalized ways that depressed minds self-medicate in the 21st century. If this pattern is resonating somewhere deep in you right now, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring the depths of your psyche with me. Because what we are about to uncover goes far deeper than a phone screen. The next symptom involves something as basic as eating, and what it reveals might disturb you. Stop and think about this for a second. When was the last time you genuinely looked forward to a meal, not just eating because it was time to eat, but actually feeling real pleasure or anticipation about food? The clinical term for what I am describing is appetite dysregulation, and it appears as a core diagnostic criterion for major depression. Depression does not always take away your appetite. Sometimes it simply takes away your enjoyment of it. You eat because your body demands it, but the pleasure is gone. Food becomes fuel at best, an obligation at worst. Studies published in the Journal of Psychiatric Research show that appetite changes are present in up to 70% of people with major depressive disorder. Yet because it does not look like obvious suffering, it often goes unreported to doctors and unrecognized by the individual themselves. In some cases, the opposite pattern emerges. People eat compulsively, seeking the dopamine hit that food once provided, now blunted by depressive neurochemistry. Both patterns, eating too little and eating too much with no real pleasure, are two sides of the same neurochemical disruption. Brain chemistry, not character. This is not a willpower problem. This is not about discipline. It is a symptom of a brain whose reward system has been quietly dimmed, and the next habit we need to discuss goes even deeper, into the very language of your relationships. Now forget the physical symptoms for a moment, because this next one lives entirely inside your relationships. How often do you apologize, not for things you actually did wrong, but for existing, for taking up space, for having needs, for sending a message that might have bothered someone, for asking a question, for just being present in a room? Excessive apologizing is one of the most overlooked behavioral signatures of chronic guilt, rooted in depression. Research published in Psychological Science confirms that people experiencing depressive episodes engage in significantly more apologetic behavior, even in entirely neutral situations where no apology is remotely warranted. The psychological mechanism behind this is what clinicians call maladaptive guilt. In a depressed brain, the default assumption becomes that you are a burden, that your presence is an imposition, that you are somehow responsible for every discomfort in the environment around you. As the psychologist Dorothy Rowe once described, depression is a prison where you are both the suffering prisoner and the cruel jailer. The constant apologies are not politeness. They are a symptom of a mind that has turned against itself, one that has accepted, somewhere below conscious awareness, that it deserves less than everyone around it. Every apology is a small tax paid on the belief that your presence is inherently too much. And what comes after this connects directly to the most quietly devastating loss that depression causes. Here is where the story takes a genuinely dark turn. You used to love something. Maybe it was music, drawing, running, reading, cooking, gaming, being outdoors, and at some point, quietly, without a clear announcement, you stopped, not because life got too busy, not because you matured beyond it. The interest simply faded. The clinical term for what I am describing is anhedonia, and it is considered by many researchers to be the single most defining feature of major depression, even more so than sadness itself. Anhedonia. The word comes from the Greek, an meaning without and hedon meaning pleasure, without pleasure. A study published in Biological Psychiatry found that anhedonia involves a specific disruption in the brain's reward circuitry, particularly in the dopamine pathways connecting the nucleus accumbens to motivation and anticipation. Crucially, anhedonia is not the same as boredom. Boredom is wanting something and not having it. Anhedonia is not wanting anything at all. It is a flattening of the appetite for life itself. It is wanting to want something, but finding only a quiet emptiness where the desire should be. And because society teaches us that hobbies are optional luxuries, that losing interest in things is just growing up, anhedonia slips through years and decades entirely unnoticed. But what comes next reveals something even more pervasive. Something that attacks not your pleasure, but your ability to think. Have you ever read the same sentence 4 times and still not retained what it said, tried to recall a word that was just in your mind moments ago, and found nothing, walked into a room and completely forgotten why? Not once, but as a regular, frustrating pattern in your daily life. What you are describing is not distraction. It is cognitive slowing, a documented neurological signature of depression. Research published in the Journal of Affective Disorders demonstrates that major depression produces measurable decreases in working memory, processing speed, and executive function. Even in individuals who describe themselves as completely high-functioning, the brain's prefrontal cortex, the structure responsible for sustained focus, planning, and rational decision-making, is directly compromised by the neurochemical disruption of a depressive state. Not distracted, actually impaired. People living with unrecognized depression routinely describe feeling slow or like they are thinking through dense fog. They attribute it to aging, to stress, to simply not being smart enough anymore. But the research consistently tells a different story. These are not character flaws. They are a brain struggling to perform under the sustained metabolic and neurochemical weight of depression. Some clinicians argue that cognitive impairment is the most practically devastating long-term consequence of untreated chronic depression. And next, we arrive at the habit that most convincingly disguises itself as a personality type, not a symptom. Let me pause here, because this next part fundamentally changes how you see a lot of people around you, and possibly yourself. In psychology, there is a meaningful and important distinction between introversion, a personality preference for solitude that feels genuinely energizing and restorative, and social withdrawal, a retreat from human connection that is driven by pain, shame, or a quiet exhaustion with the effort of being seen. One is who you are. The other is a symptom wearing your personality as a disguise. Chronic depression frequently manifests as an increasing reluctance to see friends, answer calls, follow through on plans, or show up in social environments, even ones you once genuinely enjoyed. The person cancels, avoids, and slowly disappears from the lives of people who care about them, and because introversion has become celebrated in contemporary culture. Because saying you prefer staying home is now socially acceptable, even admirable. This symptom can hide undisturbed for years. Research from the American Journal of Psychiatry found that social withdrawal not only accompanies depression, it actively worsens it, deepening the brain's negative self-narrative and removing the co-regulation of emotion that human beings are biologically wired to need. The most terrible poverty is loneliness and the feeling of being unloved. You may not be an introvert, you may be someone in pain who has quietly learned to be alone with it. But what comes next? This is the one that looks the least like depression, and it catches almost everyone off guard. Here is what almost nobody tells you about depression. It does not always look like sadness. Sometimes it looks like anger, irritability, a short fuse that ignites at things so small they should not register at all. The glass left on the counter, the slow driver, the email that sat unanswered for 2 hours. A question asked at exactly the wrong moment. Not sadness, sometimes rage. The DSM-5 explicitly lists irritability as a core symptom of depression, particularly in adolescents, but increasingly well documented in adults as well. A large-scale study published in JAMA Psychiatry found that up to 54% of individuals with major depressive disorder reported significant irritability as a primary feature. And in many of these cases, the irritability was more prominent than sadness itself. The mechanism is precise. Depression depletes the brain's emotional regulation resources over time. When those resources are already stretched thin by the constant background weight of chronic despair, any additional demand, however minor, exceeds the system's remaining capacity. What erupts is anger. The outburst that looks like aggression is often a nervous system that has simply run out of room for one more thing. The people around someone in this state see someone difficult, reactive, exhausting. What they are witnessing is a mind under sustained psychological pressure that has finally broken beneath one last small weight. Send this to someone who needs to hear that their anger might not be who they are, because next, this is the one I promised you from the very beginning. Here we are, this is the behavior I promised you at the very beginning of this video. The one that millions of people wear as a badge of honor. That gets praised in job interviews, celebrated on social media, held up as the definition of ambition, drive, and discipline. Perfectionism, the relentless drive to do everything perfectly, to leave no room for error, to never feel like enough no matter what you have achieved, is one of the strongest and most consistently documented predictors of chronic depression in the entire clinical literature. A landmark meta-analysis published in Psychological Bulletin, examining data from over 25,000 participants across multiple decades of research, found that maladaptive perfectionism, the kind driven by fear of failure rather than genuine love of excellence, is significantly and repeatedly associated with depressive episodes, chronic anxiety, and suicidal ideation. The perfectionist does not fear failure. They fear that failure will confirm what they already secretly believe about themselves. Psychologically, perfectionism is fundamentally a strategy to avoid the pain of being imperfect, and that pain is rooted in exactly the same deep self-worth deficits that fuel depression. The constant striving, the inability to rest, the voice that says nothing is ever quite enough. These are not ambition. These are symptoms dressed in the costume of high achievement. If you recognize something in yourself just now, comment "perfect mask," because you may have just seen something that has been hiding in plain sight your entire life. The final habit brings everything together and offers something more important than a list. Here is the truth that ties all 10 together, every habit we have explored. The oversleeping, the endless scrolling, the lost appetite, the constant apologies, the faded pleasures, the foggy mind, the isolation, the irritability, the perfectionism, shares one common root. Each one is the brain's attempt to survive a pain it was never taught to name or given permission to feel. Chronic depression does not always announce itself through obvious suffering. More often, it operates through the quiet architecture of everyday behavior. It hides inside the ordinary. It disguises itself as personality. It wears your daily life like a mask that fits so well you forget it is there. And this is both its greatest danger and, understood correctly, its most important signal. Symptoms hiding as habits. There is a concept in clinical psychology called help-seeking recognition. The capacity to identify in your own experience the signs that something is genuinely wrong, rather than accepting them as simply who you are. Research consistently shows that the longer these patterns go unrecognized, the deeper the neurological architecture of depression becomes. and the more demanding the path to recovery. But recognition itself is a form of medicine. Naming what has been unnamed is not weakness. It is one of the most courageous things a person can do. The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. You are not broken. You are not weak. You may simply be someone who has been living with symptoms that no one ever pointed to and named. And naming them, truly saying them, is where healing begins. These 10 habits are not character flaws. They are not evidence of weakness, laziness, or excessive sensitivity. They are the language that a struggling mind learns to speak when it has never been given better words, when the world has taught it that suffering quietly is more acceptable than asking for help. Depression is not always dark rooms and tears. Sometimes it is ordinary life, quietly draining from the inside out. If you recognized yourself in any of these, in 1, in 5, or in all 10, hold that recognition with compassion rather than judgment, because the distance between a symptom and a strategy is simply awareness. Awareness is where change begins. Speak to someone you trust. Reach out to a mental health professional. Treat what you have recognized today not as a verdict, but as a door, an opening toward understanding yourself more honestly than you ever have before. The habits that have been hiding your pain are also the path to finally finding it. If you made it this far, comment seen and named, because you just did something most people never do. You looked at the ordinary, unremarkable details of your daily life and asked a braver question. Welcome to the Psyche Project.